We are now at episode 4
Yeah,
of Leadership in Movies, which is awesome.
it's such an extreme kind of leadership, like totalitarian, and very strict rules, and like people were only allowed to do like basic stuff like work and pretty much nothing else, because all the arts and movies and literature and music and everything was forbidden, right? And this is something I didn't like. Why would that be um, against people just living their lives? But then I understood, because when they started talking about how an idea is, you cannot fight an idea, you cannot kill an idea, and that's when I got this how okay, it's because of the arts and movies and books and all these can give you ideas and can move people and can make them cohesive, and that would be very dangerous for such an autocratic leadership.
Yeah.
So and the second thing I noticed is that at the beginning V was alone, like against the whole system. So it wasn't like let's say if you were to compare Star Wars, where we have the rebellion and you have two camps, right? Two armies. But here he was like on his own against the whole system, and this is very powerful. I think as a start.
Yeah, absolutely. You see him. There's similarities because it's rebelling against this empire, this system, the totalitarian kind of system, like you were saying. But you see this one is really playing out the rise against the system and that whole kind of where the rebellion starts. And I mean, it's that classic kind of fear mongering that goes on, and the shutting down of any kind of ideas, which artistic ideas, creative ideas lead to innovative ideas, which leads to freedom. Really, is what they're trying to diminish.
Because the idea is a manifestation of, and the circulation of the idea is in a way the very expression of freedom, right? We're like in a democratic country, we have the freedom to speech, and we can express whatever we feel like without breaking the law, but we can express whatever we want.
Right. It's that vengeance that's there, right? And he's trying to get revenge. Obviously, that is not a good goal to carry around and be your driving force. But I will say, I think all of us, everyone has been felt wronged or maybe hurt or disappointed by something in some way, and that can be a helpful driving force for motivating you to overcome something or that kind of thing too. So I think it's important to not let vengeance drive what your behavior, but help you find some bigger purpose and maybe give you some motivation, at least to get started and kind of prove people wrong, if you will. So I think that was kind of one of the leadership lessons that stood out to me. But I will say too, certainly revenge, not the best answer or not the thing you should carry on. There's a rap line that I always loved from a rapper named Royce the 5'9". He works with Eminem, and he's got this line where he says, "Revenge is like letting somebody live in your head rent free." So when you think about that, like, don't necessarily just get so focused on the revenge part, but hopefully it's motivation to do something more or achieve something more.
Yeah, I would say that even though the revenge and vendetta, right from the title, is a centerpiece of the movie, I would say that if you look a bit deeper, actually, yes, he was punishing. So V was punishing the ones that wronged him, right. But at the same time, he wanted to empower people, the the people to rise against the regime because he felt that was very wrong. So I think it's not only about punishing individually the people who had anything to do with him, or abusing other people like the priest, or the anchor, the TV anchor, or anybody else who he punished individually, but rather that happened because those people were in key positions in the government, and he wanted to overthrow the government, and by killing them and by spreading this idea and the masks and everything, I think it's beyond his personal revenge. He also empowered people to do the right thing, and because that was definitely a wrong type of leadership. And I mean, if you cannot speak your mind, and if you cannot read books or watch movies or do whatever you want, if you have curfews, and also because they lied and they killed people like by the hundreds of thousands with the virus, right?
Yeah.
So and I just, to your point about how do you see that applied in the business world, I would say that if you look at any organization or team where ideas cannot move around back and forth within the teams and the whole organization, if they cannot do that freely, then you will find a similar type of leadership based on other things, mostly on fear. So you cannot have both. If you have an organization where the ideas and teams, within teams, the ideas, and they bounce back of each other, and they talk about them, and they're all welcome to be discussed, you will not find that type of leadership, the tyrannical. But if you don't, they exclude each other. You cannot find both in an organization. So I think it's very important if you look at it from this perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly the whole approach is the opposite of that kind of servant leadership that we taught. That servant leadership is flipping it kind of on the other end, where the leader that serves the masses, and you hear them talk about that kind of throughout the movie, where these concepts of V is continually kind of talking about that the government, people shouldn't be afraid of their government. The government should be afraid of their people, and not that leaders should be afraid of the people, but they should be embracing the people and their resources, and again flipping it on the other end, and taking in those ideas, and that's how you really grow. And companies that do that flourish and have much better returns in every single way, as far as customer experience, employee experience, innovation, all that kind of stuff. And so and it's the classic kind of, they're trying to diminish any diversity or any difference or any of that, which we've seen that's what makes a good world, a good business, whatever it may be, is having that diverse thought. So
and the difference, to your point, that the ideas and the discussion of the ideas come exactly from being different.
Right.
You see that it's a very interesting correlation, because if we were all the same, then there was nothing to discuss, right? If everybody has the same type of experiences, has the same life, the same boring jobs, the same, then what is it to discuss? So that's why they were killing everything that was different, and they were trying to align everybody, on the same denominator, because there isn't many ideas when you do that.
Right. Right. Well, it was and there's that line that Chancellor says, we got to make them remember why they need us, kind of thing. And it's that whole, again, in control and power and all of that. And there's that one line where they were going to, it's our job to report the news, it's the government job to write it. And so that was like in that approach of, there's just everything is being thought of at this high level and being sent down.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly the chancellor was at that extreme level where even his own, the kind of group of people that he would meet with, he even said at that one point, there was a point where he said, I'm not, it's basically it's not asking for your opinion or your interpretation is irrelevant. And these are his leaders that he's interacting with. And even still, he's basically just give me the facts, and fix it and change it and do what I say.
And to your point about the leadership being afraid of the people and not the other way around, I would say yes. It's not healthy that the leadership should be afraid about the people, but they should be feeling responsible. So because like even the political leaders that are governing any healthy democracy, right? They are there because somebody put them there. They were elected, and people who elected them are having expectations. Well, in companies, many leaders are not elected. However, if they don't have the buy-in of their teams or their organizations, they cannot last. So, in a way, even though a leader in a company is appointed, right? They say, "Hey, you are now the manager or the director of this group of people," right? But if that leader cannot have the buy-in and doesn't have a very servant and circular leadership and doesn't allow or even encourage ideas to circulate and to be discussed and to have the input of the other people, he or she will not last, right? Because it doesn't, or there will be like a constant battle, and everybody will fight back on decisions, and I don't think any team can survive for a long time like that.
Well, and you do see that at some companies, and at least you hear about that, right? I mean, I've been pretty lucky in the places I've worked at, but I've certainly heard stories where there is that top-down approach, and if there's any dissension in the ranks, there's that fear that goes on. It's an interesting thing because, I mean, that's really what there's this ongoing theme about, the idea of freedom and choice, that leadership, the chancellor referred to as chaos and all of that, and kind of was trying to get away from chaos, and that's why they have all these problems and all of that. But really, again, it turns out that the government itself is the one that's created all the problems and used this kind of slander against any other independent thought. There's a line where he also says, we need to make anyone wearing the mask, when he sends out those masks at the end, we need to make that an example of them, or they need to be made an example of. I mean, I will say you hear that in the business world when somebody is not kind of following in line or doing what it's following whatever is being dictated down. They're made an example of. It's interesting. I'll talk to people, and I even have felt this sometimes. I remember in kind of lower positions in my career, where oftentimes when a leader reaches out to you, if they reach out and they want to meet with you or something like that, you automatically get like kind of a lump in your throat or maybe butterflies in your stomach because you don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And that's a result of us just having this fear, like, well, the leader only talks to people when something bad happens or when I'm in trouble or somebody gets in trouble. So there's this, I think unfortunately we all live with, oftentimes places have these kind of fears built in because leaders step in when they're just shutting things down or they're seen as that. And it's important to create an environment where that's not the case. I remember certainly having staff, and I really did try to make an effort to, if I would reach out to them, that they wouldn't feel like it was a bad situation. It was, it was a good thing when a leader was connecting with you. And I tried to do that. You try to do that more routinely. Anyways, the control by fear is definitely a real thing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let's talk about a bit about Evie. So we don't know much about her and her past, especially up to a point. And but when we do, it's very. I mean, for me at least, they don't say that specifically, but I think she wasn't just randomly chosen by V. Because as we see later on, her parents were activists, and they were also killed eventually by the government, right? And so she had this, in a way, she's this thirst for revenge inside her, but it was just not, expressed. And what V did was showing her a way to, take it out and to do something good for the people.
I mean, you start to wonder, did V select her? Like, was he they don't ever say that, but there is that part where V is basically going to kill kills one of the female doctor, and they're talking about the coincidence. I think that's where it's at. They're talking about coincidence, and he said that nothing's a coincidence.
Yes.
And then there's that other part where the one of the inspectors is talking about how he went to Lark Hill, the facility, and he's basically saying he kind of saw the whole thing like it was just this plan in front of him, like this history and how everything kind of unfolded. So it is very interesting how they put this character in there, and it seems very random that V would just rescue her of all people, but she clearly has this this story, a backstory, and then forward story, even at the end when he's basically kind of saying it's over for me, and now it's more about your choice, and I'm handing this all over to you, kind of thing. So it's very fascinating how they kind of put that all together.
Yeah. And like as you said, he mentioned specifically that there are no coincidences at some point, and also because as we see him so well organized, and so like to do everything that he did by his own.
Yeah.
Like you have to be like perfectly organized and plan ahead and everything. So I don't think there is a chance that she was just randomly chosen, but rather he looked for people who have specific type of profile, and she had everything. Like her parents were killed, and then like she in a way she was like an apprentice, if you will. He took her like an apprentice to pass on this mission to make it better for the people.
Well, and when you think about that from a leadership lens, and the idea of having a foresight, right? Like being a leader and being in business in general, you really have to have this foresight and the patience and the concept and the ability to piece it all together and to bring in somebody who seems to fit this kind of correct person that you are going to partner with. Yeah, it's all very interesting when you think about that. And like you said, the work that V had to put in place and all of that, which some of it could seem random or fate or what have you, or it just kind of all played out exactly how he wanted it to. But it clearly was over a long period of time. I mean, even his plan of when he came out to the public, he was basically saying, a year from now, I'm going to do this big next thing, and you all are going to be, this is your chance to all of you to be involved. So even that can be, a challenge for anybody to think of. Okay, I got this plan. I'm going to do this big thing a year from now. You know what I mean? Like it's not. You really have to have some patience, basically. And in business and in leadership, that's certainly the truth.
Well, if you consider that when he was at the subway tunnel, he mentioned that actually it took him 10 years to clean the tracks.
Right.
Like he's been working for this for a very long time. So and again, as you mentioned, as a leader, because he was a leader, even though he didn't have an organization, but he was like an informal leader of the whole population that were repressed, right?
Right.
And I think the ultimate proof for that he was their leader, he gave his life for the people,
Right.
right?
And it was his plan. Yeah.
Because he could have escaped really from like he ambushed everybody and he could kill anybody without being hurt because he was very well trained, and he also had some kind of superpowers if you think about it, right? Because of the treatment in the facility. So I think that he was, when the doctor mentioned that he had some curious antibodies and stuff like that. So I'm sure he could have escaped from the scene when he got really hurt.
Yeah.
But he instead sacrificed.
Right. And it was just kind of his bigger plan. Well, what was interesting when you speak about Evie and kind of thinking back, there was that whole ordeal where he basically captures her and simulates this kind of jail imprisonment torture kind of sequence, but his goal is to basically break her of her fear. But what's driving him and what he basically tried to instill in her was, I mean, these are obviously very extreme examples, but there's that purpose there, right? And having that purpose and that reason and that why is so important, not only in yourself, but creating that in whoever you're working with to drive things forward and to be able to, push forward for 10 years to work on clearing some tracks or whatever it may be, like he clearly had purpose there.
Yeah, and the reason that, the fact that he helped her get rid of the fear, he didn't have to, right? He could have done everything on his own because obviously he was very organized and had everything planned ahead, 10 years even. So again, this is a very important leadership feature, right? And when you want to empower people and to help them grow, right? And let's say she was like in his team, right? So he helped her overcome this major roadblock, right? And he said at the end, now you're really free. You have no fear.
Right.
So I think from a leadership perspective, if all the leaders in business and organizations would do that, and not through that process, but also there are other options. But when you do that, I mean, you would have like an amazing organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important that's that development, right? And he was, obviously it's, it's a rebellion and it's this whole other concept, but he's trying to inspire, create purpose, has some higher reason, and he's trying to motivate people. And with Evie's case, he's mentoring her in a sense. And great leaders do that, where they're not just focused on just themselves. They're focused on not just their legacy, but extending that and kind of going beyond that. And I think that's so important to find others, to help groom them, to help them develop, and prepare them to carry on whatever this purpose, because if you really believe strongly in whatever that purpose is, that torch should carry on beyond. It's not just, it shouldn't just end with you. It should really continue on. So it's interesting to watch. That's kind of the development of this rebellion and seeing it start to.
And also to your point about inspiring other people and passing on, the torch. What's also interesting is the scene when the little girl with the eyeglasses, when she was painting the V sign.
Right.
So I think that's, when you think of, she was probably less than 10 years old or so.
Right.
So she didn't have like a very advanced understanding of the world or the political, structure, or because she was a child. But even her, like she got inspired and she felt like V, even though they were portraying him like a terrorist on the TV, right? And they were only saying bad things about him and about killing people. Even that being said, his message came through, and even a 10-year-old girl was inspired so much as to do the V sign and putting herself in danger, because that's definitely, there was a very big crime in that
Yeah,
structure.
obviously. Well, and what's interesting is there's that moment where V for Vendetta, where V comes on, he takes over the TV station, and then afterward, like right afterwards, they play this kind of clip. The news plays this clip of basically saying V was killed, and you could tell like she's disgusted by that, and there it's already that kind of seed of people don't trust the community, because they know that it's all the news, all the communication, all the information you're receiving is being edited. And I felt like this was another sorry to change gears, but this was kind of another interesting component of this, of how the communication, how this attempt to control and manipulate all the news and all the information and all of that. And you see this again later on when they start playing these kind of fear-related clips about, that there's been some poisoning and some deaths and these things tied back to V and all this stuff. When the government the chancellor starts to feel like he's losing control, he starts sending out the fear message again, and people are like, oh, that's a bunch of, bull, and that, they didn't believe it. And I think what stands out to me with that, the message is that when leaders are the only ones creating the communication, and people don't trust it, right? And so, because if you have this narrow kind of way of communications being sent out, and it's so important to create an opportunity for employees to receive unbiased information, if you will, and so, I mean, I think that, again, leadership controlling everything creates mistrust, and the way to overturn that is actually by allowing staff or your employees to be a part of, if not the main source of how information gets communicated, and involving them in that, even if it means it might be at the expense of the leaders a little bit, making a joke or something. There's that part where they kind of make fun of the chancellor in that show. Obviously the guy ends up being killed because of it, but anyways, that was something that stood out to me, with just the communication and the control of it. And just didn't trust it. Even an 11-year-old girl didn't trust it.
Yeah, and it's obvious that ideas like we were discussing at the beginning, they need to circulate. So you need communication both ways or multiple ways. So in their case, there was only one way communication, and everything was either orders, you have to do this or this or this, or praising themselves about what great things they did or something like that, or about terrorists that were trying to do bad stuff. But there was nothing really output from the people as well. So there was nothing. So
yeah, again, and that's that whole insane control, and again, leading by fear and all of that too, which as we see in so many movies, is not a good way to lead.
Yeah. She was taken, when Evie was taken to the priest, and she somehow was not was not in all the way. So she had she tried to escape at that point, and
Right.
she tried to confess to the priest about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then she said, after the priest was killed, she said, I'm sorry. And he said, you did what you thought is right. So even though she obviously made a mistake or
Betrayed him. Yeah.
betrayed him, right? He said, you did what you thought is right. So that's, again, a very good leadership um, uh, feature, when it's okay, you're allowed to do mistakes, to
Yeah.
make mistakes, right?
Right.
Because that you did that with a good heart and good intentions. So okay, it doesn't go well all the time, but you did what you thought was right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I will say in my own experiences as a leader, sometimes when I and it's, if you can, create an environment where people are allowed to make mistakes. They feel comfortable in making mistakes because they're learning opportunities. Oftentimes when people make mistakes, they're highly apologetic, they feel bad, and they're ultimately, they're worried about losing their job or getting in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And in my conversations, I always were. It wasn't intentional. You weren't trying to, intentionally. If you were trying to sabotage things or intentionally make a mistake, that would be one thing. But this is a great learning opportunity, and that's what this is about. It's not expecting perfection.
Yeah, and when that happens and they make mistakes and they see that they are punished for it, what
Right.
happens in many organizations is they don't try to do things anymore because they say, oh, I'm not going to try this because my boss is going to punish me again if I fail. So they're not
Absolutely.
trying to do better. They're not trying to innovate. They're not expressing themselves.
Speaking of on the other side, the kind of covering up and making mistakes and all of that. Clearly that was the approach of, again, controlling that information. That was an approach of the chancellor and his government, the government, right? Was all of that, was constant cover up and constant kind of manipulating that situation. What obviously they were trying to cover up terrible things that they had done and committed. But I think one of the lessons too that I got from that was just that on the flip side, it's okay as a leader, and you should, as a leader, great leaders are the ones who do apologize, who do take ownership. And when you do that, that kind of creates that culture for, well, even this, this leader at this level is taking ownership of a problem and apologizing or being vulnerable or saying everybody makes mistakes and I'm learning from this, and demonstrating that can help your staff to understand it's okay to do the same, and they follow that kind of lead.
Yes.
So I think it's just, again, the contrast there of like that extreme, we're going to cover this kind of up. So even that book that the inspector got when he's reading this, this book that essentially gives all the doctor's book that has all the details of kind of what went on there at Lark Hill, and the chancellor quickly spins it to where it's, it was planted and it's fake and it's not real and all of that, and that should never basically get out there, and if it does, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I would say like maybe the last idea, just before the explosion, when all the people dressed up and with the masks are, going in. Even the army, right? Let's say in lack of having a leader, even though there was a bad leader, like neither of them were approachable, right? They were not responding. So the army didn't start shooting people, randomly, but instead they did nothing. They stand down because they didn't have any reasons to shoot those people, right?
Right. And they knew it was wrong. Yeah, they knew it was wrong too.
Yeah, exactly. So they were part of the people at some point, because the people, the image that they went through them and they were like, everybody was there, so they were also regular people, just following stupid orders from the horrible leaders. But hopefully at that point the leaders were dead. So
Right. Well, and it's interesting that point, that kind of what happened there. You see that in organizations and companies when there is some kind of the people who have to enforce it, the people who are working with the frontline staff, the supervisors, quality team, or whoever they are, and they're having to kind of enforce these rules. If they don't believe in that, if they're not behind it, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, and I think that happens where this decision up high, and they're not involved, if they're not involving these people down below in that decision making, that decision gets watered down or doesn't resonate, and it never really becomes effective.
Yeah, just imagine this real quick scenario, right? If a leader has input from the people who are in contact with the market, let's say, right, with the customers, and they are bringing in information, and they're telling to the leader, hey, we need to do this, right, because this is what the customers are saying. And if the leader says, no, we don't do that because I say something else, or if I think that's stupid because you're dismissing, real information from the market and coming from the people,
right,
and you're just thinking about doing something else because that's what you think is appropriate, and that because you have the power. But
right.
it would be like a similar situation in the business world.
I mean, obviously that's an extreme in V for Vendetta, it's an extreme situation, but yeah, I mean, people are going to be, if they're not on board and they're not bought into it, and it's just being told to them, they're not going to do what you ask them to do, or they're going to do it subpar or what have you. Similar, situations where chief executive officers have listened to their employers, Harley Davidson, Southwest Airlines, those kind of places where they went to their employees and at the base level and asked them, how do we improve this? And they actually listened and made those improvements or those changes, and they were better for it substantially. So clearly there's plenty of example out there of you should be listening or involving all of your staff in a decision-making process.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching, and see you at our next episode.
Yes. Awesome.